Well, today I get to talk with Brett Ogata, and Brett and I have gotten to really know each other this spring quite well. Brett was one of two coaches, along with Steve Vallet from Liberty High School, that had this brainchild idea to come up with a character challenge to inspire kids during COVID when we weren't there with them. And so, you know, usually what was written, if you saw those challenges, Brett was the guy writing those. So Brett, I thank you so much for your investment and how it reached out not only to your school, but to schools around the state, including my program and even other states. So Brett is currently the head coach at Kentridge High School since 2017, and he spent 8 years as the head coach at Mercer Island before that. And it's just been a pleasure to get to know you. And what I'd like to hear from you first is kind of your family background and your history, maybe even going back to grandparents and so forth, if you think that's important, and what role race has played in your family history, and you know, if racism's been involved in that and so forth. So if you can start us off there.
Okay. Well, on my dad's side, his mom and dad were from Japan, and they moved over here to start a new life in the United States. And that's my grandparents. I actually never met them because they both passed away before I was actually born. And then on my mom's side, her grandparents, it was an arranged marriage. My grandpa on my mom's side was working, I believe, on the railroads here in U.S. And my grandma was shipped over to him from Japan to meet him and get married here. So that's how they met. And then my grandpa on my mom's side passed away before I got a chance to meet him. So I was, cause I'm like the last kid in my whole generation. And my grand, out of both sides of the family, I'm the youngest by far. So anyways, I never really got a chance to meet my grandparents except for my grandma on my mom's side. It's the only one I really knew. So, but in terms of, you know, my mom's side, her parents were like, okay, we live in America, we live here. I want you to be as American as possible. So my mom has my grandparents were, very much Japanese influences, but at the same time, they were trying to keep those away from the kids and trying to raise them up American as much as possible. They said, hey, we live in America, we got to be American as much as possible. So, and they lived in Priest River, Idaho, is where they grew up. So it was a really small town. It's just east of Spokane. If you just go east on, I guess, Highway 2, I'm pretty sure it is, and you go and it's like the first town you'll run into once you hit Idaho is Priest River, and that's where my grandparents grew up. My mom grew up in that small town and stuff. And in terms of racism she dealt with, it all stemmed right around World War II is where the racism really happened a lot for my parents, because of course, of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor and all that, and the hatred towards the Japanese or of doing that. And so what happened is that like my mom would tell me stories about it was just her, there's only her family and then one other Japanese family and all that. So, she was called a lot the word Jap, during that time, because people were angry and mad and all those things. And so she had to defend herself. And so my aunt and her both told me stories of them growing up, of just kind of what they had to do. Like, a certain boy would keep calling my aunt, the Jap word, and keep saying that over and over again. And then, to defend herself, she just chased the kid down and beat him up in the park one time. And that, my mom's side of the family, my aunts and uncles, especially my aunts, though, they're all really kind of tough, really tough women, and both mentally and physically, they be, so that's where I learned. So I got that from them. And then my mom also had a story like that, where a boy would yell the same thing, and then he would yell behind like a white picket fence, typical American, and then he'd run, and then my mom got mad, and then he ran inside his house, and my mom actually just chased him and beat him up in his living room. That's what she told me, because she was just sick of the racism being called that word. So So that's what my family, or my mom's side, had to deal with. And during the war, when that happened, the government came in and went through. They went through their house because they weren't on the West Coast. They didn't have to go to the internment camps, and I'll talk about that with my dad's side because he had to go. But my mom's side didn't have to go, but they did come in and they took all cameras from the house. They took all tape recording material, anything like that. So they took all those things from the house, and I know that. So that's really, but they got to stay at their house, and because they lived in Idaho. But then my dad, he lived in Seattle, and so my dad and his family, they had to get relocated. So they were told, basically they had like 3 days to pack up, 2 suitcases per person, and they had 3 days to deal with all business affairs. So kind of imagine that right now, that all of a sudden your whole life is turned upside down. You're like, let's say you ran my grandparents ran a small cleaning business, dry cleaning business. So they had to sell the business, the equipment, whatever, because if not, it's just a free for all for whoever wanted to take it. So they're just trying to get, and so people were coming in, investors, and gain, dollars on the pennies. I mean, just really gain great deals from, because they knew they had to sell. They only had 3 days. So it was really tough unless you had friends who would say, oh yeah, I'll take care of it. And then if they had luckily enough, a friend, who wasn't Japanese, that would take care of it, then they could come back to it. But even sometimes that happened. And then the friend would just say, well, you wrote it, because you have to write it into their name. And then their friend actually would just say, well, I'm just going to take the business. And then they're kind of out of luck. So things like that happen to the Japanese, I know. And so my parents anyway had, my grandparents on my dad's side. So they had 3 days, they packed up. And then what they had to do was they got a bus down to the Puyallup Fairgrounds, where the state fair is and all that now. That was the location of where they took all the Japanese from Seattle area, and I'm sure other areas too. I don't remember all the details of it, but I know from Seattle. They got shipped down there. They were there for 6 months, living in Puyallup. And then from Puyallup, they got, by train, they got down to Minidoka, which is near Twin Falls, Idaho. And it's just, I can't remember where it was, 'cause I've seen it before. I've been there. It's just, I think it's a little bit northeast. I hope I'm saying that right. I think it's northeast of Twin Falls, Idaho. And anyway, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like just crops and farming area and all that. So, and that part of Idaho can get really cold, really hot. And so they were put into, they call it an internment camp, but really it was a concentration camp is really what it is. I mean, they had fences up, electric fences around them so they can't get out. They're in there, and they had to do their own schooling and everything else. And then they had, I went and saw this. So their housing didn't have any insulation. It was just basically just, wood put together. And they had one huge stove oven, cast iron, stove oven in the middle. And then they had a wood partition between, so the big, huge barrack, and there was about 4 families, I think it was, per partition, I think. And then there was, separate woods, and they were only 10 feet high. So people could peer over and see each other's families and stuff. And they're just, so it was really minimal, very minimal necessities. And plus with no insulation, you got, in Idaho, it can get, 90s, 100s in the summer. It can get, really cold, a lot of snow in the wintertime there. So it's a really tough time, I know, for my family, or my dad's side of the family. And then, the other things that was shocking when I saw this was that the showers and bathrooms were all public. So the females and the males had no privacy. It was just all out in the open. So it was really, it was really tough. And they had, and just kind of hearing all that, it was, with today's world, people would get really upset with that. But, the Japanese culture is just such a culture of just compliance and we're just okay. Well, this is what they want us to do. Was going to do it, so they didn't fight it. They just did it, and then just kind of like, hey, what's the best situation possible of this? And then they just, when they come out, they just try to do their best to come out of it. And like my dad, so when they got out of there, the hard part. Well, I'll go back to going back to the internment camps before I tell my dad how he got out. But the hard part was, I remember when I went there and visited it and just learning more about them. They had a sign. I forgot the order, but there's an executive order they had that they either had to say, I renounce my allegiance to Japan if they were a Japanese citizen, which then basically means that they have no citizenship anywhere. No, they can't be a citizen of Japan. They can't be a citizen of the United States, because back then they didn't have, a process to become a U.S. citizen. So that was really tough on those citizens. Now, if you're an American citizen, you just had to denounce Japan, which is okay, and they did that. But the tough ones were the ones that were from Japan coming over, and there's obviously a lot of ramifications with that if you don't have a country associated with you. So that was, I know, one of the tough executive orders that they had on that. So I remember that being emphasized to me when I was going through learning this stuff. And then coming to my dad. So my dad, unfortunately, was born in Japan. So everyone else in his family, all his brothers and sisters were born in the United States. They're all American citizens. But what happened was that my grandma went back to visit Japan. And I don't know, my dad never really told me why or what, but it's something, I just kind of thinking logically that if you're pregnant, you're about to have a kid, you probably wouldn't go back unless there's a reason. So she probably went back for some reason. I don't know why, but she had, so my dad was born there. So my dad wasn't an American citizen. So that caused more problems for him than his brothers and sisters when he came back to the United States, because, there was no process for that. So then after the internment camps were over, he went to Garfield High School, and he really worked on education. So he wanted to be a doctor. He became an orthodontist, but to become an orthodontist and licensed, he had to become an American citizen. So he's actually the first Japanese American to be a Japanese to become an American citizen in Washington, state of Washington.
Through the naturalization process?
Yes, naturalization process. He was the first one. So it was my uncle on my mom's side was a lawyer. So he helped get my dad through the process and everything, because they had to speed it up, and because he was going to be an orthodontist in Seattle, they had to work on that. So that was, one of the things that I know. And then and a lot of, so I know with the Japanese, their whole thought was, and just the culture is that through education, we'll overcome all the adversity that we're facing, just because we're gonna, we're just gonna be compliant. We're gonna learn, and just and try to succeed as best we can through business and through education and through working hard. So that's the kind of the Japanese thought process behind those things. And then the other thing, so that's really kind of the background of my dad's family, and then my mom's family. And my mom, like I said, was in Idaho, and they met at University of Washington because she went to University of Washington. He was going to school there, so that's what they met. So that's kind of how it all came together.
Okay, so you said, I just want to ask one thing with the concentration or internment camp. Either term could be appropriate. 6 months in Puyallup. How long were they in the internment camp?
2.5 years, I want to say. I think it's two and a half, something.
So they definitely cycled through all those hot and cold seasons over there, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, talking Japanese culture, one of the things that I've always learned is the importance of elders in your history and so forth, and family. So the fact that your ancestors were really saying, hey, we're in America, let's make sure we learn to speak English and all the different things to assimilate, right?
Mhm.
Was assimilation, what was the background behind wanting to assimilate? What did the fear of racism or being held back play into that, or can you speak to that part?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. My mom, that's all my mom ever told me, is my mom was just like, hey, her parents were just kept saying, we're American. I want you to be American. I want you to, we live in America. So uh, they really went to the degree of, like, we want to break away from all our Japanese traditions to become an American family, because that's where we live now. So we want to inherit American traditions and those things. So really growing up, we had, from my dad's side a little bit more, and a little bit on my mom's side, but we had, a really Japanese American tradition type of cultural background when I growing up. It was very Americanized, my childhood growing up, and it's from my mom's side more so than my dad. And then that was just kind of, so like, learning more about Japan and learning more about, I got a chance to meet my cousins who live in Japan and go visit them. And that's helped learn more about the culture and, where they come from and kind of the, it's really it's my grandma on my dad's side's family is the one that that we kept in contact with the most, and they live in the Fukuoka area, which is down south in Japan. So that's where I've been to visit them, and that's helped fill in some of those gaps,
Right.
For the Japanese culture. But yeah, in terms of your question, I don't really have a reason why. I think it was just as simple as we live in America. We want to be as American as possible.
Right. Yeah. To be rounded up and put in the internment camps, 1/16 Japanese heritage is all that it took, right? And it didn't matter whether you're an American citizen or not, or if you'd been here for a generation or two. So it's something that our government actually has made an official apology for. George H.W. Bush did. And I believe he put even a little bit of reparations in there, which is a hot topic now with African Americans. Like, should there be reparations? Do you know if your dad, since he was in that, received any type of apology letter or reparations at all?
Yes, he did. And when I was in college, he got it. So it was in 93, 92, something like that. He got it. And then, and just, the typical Japanese way is that he just took the money immediately. I think it was 10, 12,000, something like that. And he just took that immediately and just put it into pay for my tuition.
Right.
That's all he did with it. He just moved it over and paid for education. So that's really what he did with that money. So he, so with that, that's what so my dad did get that. He did get the letter, and but that's it. You talk about the businesses and all that stuff they lost. I mean, that's nothing compared to what happened to them,
right?
In terms of that time. So.
Okay, so now let's talk about you personally. There's not a lot of Japanese football coaches that I see out there. I know we already talked with Masaki, and then you. It's kind of the two that come right to mind in Washington here. So what can you speak to on you personally, not your parents or grandparents, ways that you maybe have encountered racial barriers or even racism?
Well, I think, one is I grew up on Mercer Island is where I grew up. And I think on Mercer Island, now it's different, but, it's about 20% Asian. But when I grew up on Mercer Island, there wasn't many Asians on the island. I think there was all of maybe 6 or 7 Japanese families that I grew up with in my grade, and then maybe about 3 or 4 Chinese, and then maybe about another 4 or 5 other Asian cultures. It wasn't as prevalent to have the other the Vietnamese, the Thais, Koreans. They weren't over here yet at that point as much. So it was very small in between. So about maybe 15 people out of a class of 350 at Mercer Island. So it wasn't, so it was we were a very small group. So through that, I would feel, I felt pretty much part of, because I grew up on Mercer Island, so I felt pretty much part of everything. But at the same time, I think where some of the differences is the differences in how the Caucasian families' backgrounds and traditions were a little bit different than mine, and how we would do different things, and occasionally have, back then no one knew what sushi was really, so I'd have that at New Year's and stuff, and people were like, "What are you eating? What's the fish stuff?" And stuff like that. I get asked questions, and I was just like, "It's no big deal." It's like, because when it first came out, people now love it. They just like talk about sushi like it's so common, but when it first came out, people were like, "That's gross. I'm not touching that. What are you eating there?" and all stuff. And I was just like, I grew up with it. So, that's just one, short, quick example of the culture differences and all the, my parents would have, because New Year's in Japan is where we'd have a huge celebration. New Year's in Japan is like, that's really their Christmas. Because most of Japan is Buddhist. They're not a Christian country. So although it's funny, they do now celebrate because, Christmas has been such a big thing, but it's just more of a Christmas thing than a Christian thing. But anyway, with Buddhism, it's so January 1st is really the New Year is really the big thing. So because of that, we had a huge celebration. So I'd always grow up with Christmas Day, and then a week later, we have New Year's, which is just as big. I mean, we have more family actually. So Christmas was just kind of our family, and then occasional, like a really close cousin or something might come over. But then when it's New Year's, it's like we invited everyone over to our house, and just had, all my aunts, and because the other thing about the Japanese culture is that the woman would do all the cooking. So so all my aunts and stuff would get together, and they would cook, and just I've never seen so much food in my life. So it's just all out everywhere. And then and then that's what New Year's would be. So we'd always have that, and so that was kind of the culture. So then when I have friends come over growing up, they'd be like, "What?" And, so it'd be, so that was a little bit of a difference. I think the other thing, honestly, I think relationships wise too was different, because I think it was just, they just, being that most of the girls that I met in high school and stuff were Caucasian, is different. They were just like, "Well, you're Asian." It's just kind of at that point, it was just a little bit different dynamic. So I wasn't ready to, meet as many girls sometimes just because of that fact. And then let me think what else. I think when I got to, in football though, I think, when I did football or sports and all that thing, I never really felt, and I think that's why I like sports so much, I never really felt any racism in that at all. In terms of, when I was playing, I just felt like, hey, if you're the best player, you're going to play. So we're just going to, and if you work hard, we're going to reward you. And, so that's why I think I really loved sports. And then of course, my parents were very strong on me in doing education. So, I mean, like, education was very, very, very much stressed in my family, that I had to have really good grades. And, so my mom and dad were all over us as kids. Because I have two brothers and a sister. They're all older than me. But they're all, we're all very much, taught education comes first, and then your activity second. But if you do well, they'll set the path for everything. So my dad was big on, the education path, and but he loved. My dad, became to like sports a lot more as he started watching it, and those things as he grew up. Just because I think a lot of my family's love for sports started to kind of peer over to my dad, and my mom and dad, they started liking sports more too. So, but out of all my brothers and sisters, I was the one who was most into sports. My other brothers and sisters liked sports, but I was passionate about sports. So I think, that's the one thing I think I felt good about in the sports world. Pretty much. So that was the, I think, in terms of that racism, I think that's the only thing.
Yeah. I've heard that as a quite common theme of just how unifying sports can be. And, it's just kind of this little sanctuary where you don't have to worry about racial issues and things for the most part, right? Something else I'd like you to touch on is sometimes people say, hey, well, I'm colorblind. I don't see color, or, and we are all part of the human race, and that's all that should matter. And I agree with that sentiment. Yet all colors are beautiful, and every shade of everything in between. And, I was talking to another person the other day, a Latino person, and, there's this generalization sometimes that we just say, well, they're Mexican for any Latino, and that's not necessarily the case. And Asians, I think, sometimes get lumped, and people don't look for the differences between, well, Korean and Japanese and Chinese. And can you speak to the importance of, culture and trying to actually know the people that you're interacting with?
Yeah, that's important, because I got asked that question a lot. Now that kind of forgot about that, but yeah, when I was a kid, I got asked that a lot. Are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? Are you, they would have no clue. So I would tell people about last names and try to explain to them how you can tell a Japanese last name versus a Chinese last name versus a Korean last name, a Vietnamese last name. But, back then I really had decided to talk about Chinese and Japanese more so. I didn't have to worry about the other cultures because as many of them weren't in the United States as much at that point. But yeah, that was one thing. I know a lot of people were really, confused on the differences between the different, they just thought I was, a lot of people thought Chinese and Japanese were kind of the same thing. They didn't realize there was a difference between the cultures and difference between the Asian heritage between us. So as I was telling people, I did have to do some education on telling people that. Also, some people didn't realize that the word Jap is a derogatory name. And they was like, so you're Jap? Yeah. So it's kind of like, it was just, because that word is just like the N word for African Americans in a way. And then like one of them says, hey, you're a da-da-da, and I'd be like, it wouldn't go well. And so in terms of, but it's just like, I realize people just don't understand, and just an opportunity to educate them and tell them. So people would say, you're a Jap, and I go, anise, yes. So I just, I had to tell them those things. So in terms of that, but it was, the other thing about our culture is that, we're such a culture of being quiet and obedient that we're not in, our culture is not a culture of like, hey, we're going to be in your face and be, out there and tell you, about our culture a lot. But it's, but as it presented itself, yes, I would talk about it and explain the differences that I knew about. I don't know a lot about the Chinese culture and those things. I do a little bit, but I knew a lot about Japanese culture, so that I would try to tell people about those things. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, the term, and I will just say it to quote it, and I won't use it again, Jap as the term. In World War II, that was the headline that was used in all the newspapers, all the videos or movies that went out, all used that phrase. And I think really there was an intentional dehumanizing for our soldiers to go over to fight, because it's easier to kill somebody you dehumanize than it is to just kill a person that you see as the same. And my grandfather was didn't go overseas, but he was in the military at that time. And I shared with Masaki that he really was upset when I bought a Mazda, as my first car. And the interesting thing is, one of the key people that broke that barrier for him is when Ichiro Suzuka came over and started playing for the Mariners, and he started just watching. He was a sports fan, and it actually started to break down some of those barriers. Again, just as a World War II guy, but then seeing Ichiro is just a person, right? An athlete that came over. So another way that sports kind of helped change some things here. So what would you, is there something specific to Japanese today that you have to deal with that maybe we're not aware of? That, you know, as sitting here as a white guy, or even African Americans are listening, like that's just kind of something you have to deal with that people wouldn't know.
The only thing recently, to be honest with you, is my wife is like blonde hair, blue eyed.
Mm-hmm.
So like when we come up together, people don't think we're a couple. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, you're together? Yes, we're together. You know, they think like we're not together. So I think that's the only thing that I think happens in terms of, you know, I think, you know, compared to where it was and where I am now, I think it's totally different with, you know, the Japanese. I mean, the Japanese culture, you know, and a lot of the Asian cultures have been, you know, really have been immersed into the American culture. I mean, there's, and I think, you know, I think food is a lot of the reason why, to be honest with you, because so many more restaurants, and then with restaurants come supermarkets, you know, Asian supermarkets. So then people are like, oh, I want to learn this Japanese cuisine or Chinese cuisine or Korean cuisine and all these different food places. Because back in the day, I think if I want to go to even type like a teriyaki place, which is not even, you know, American thing, but even to go there, I had to like drive to Queen Anne growing up to go to a place like that. And it's just like, okay, or, you know, and the only place like International District was the only place to get foods. But now it's like, you know, living on Mercer Island, and we have, you know, like 2 teriyaki places. We got a Japanese place. We got, you know, we got 2 Thai places. I mean, so it's like, it's just, it's a lot different now. And with Asian food coming, and more, you know, people from those countries would come over too, to introduce those. And I know a lot of families that come over and they start restaurants. That's what they do. A lot of them start the food business, and sharing their you know, the food, and the cuisines that they have. So I know that's a lot of ways. You know, it's different. And then because of all the, you know, the Asian countries have done pretty well financially too. So because of that, they've come over, and, you know, a lot of them are buying lots of property over here. And I know, like in the, you know, like Newport High School area, I know Bellevue, you know, there's a lot more Asians. Again, like I said, on Mercer Island, it's now like about 20%. I know of the students when I left, you know, Mercer Island High School, is about 20% of the students were of Asian descent there. So it's really changed compared to like when I said like we had 15 kids total, not percent, 15 kids total out of like that 350 or whatever. So it's changed a lot, and just with more awareness and more people here, it's easier for people to understand the culture a little bit more. And so I think that's where it's been a lot better. And I think, you know, the one things I know, you know, again, a lot of Asian countries or Asian populations and families do is, regardless if it's Japanese, Chinese, Korean, is education such a big piece. And I think that is, you know, with anything, you know, talk about social justice out there right now, I think education is such a huge importance of trying to overcome, you know, you know, you look at it, and everyone talks about systemic racism, and I really think it's education. It's a big piece of that whole thing, because, you know, you look at certain families, and I'm like, wow, they're really being pushed down, you know, and then add on to this coronavirus thing, and I just feel like, okay, this gap is just getting wider and wider, because there are these families that, you know, the education piece, I think, is the piece that really is the big equaling level. You know, if you get a degree the same as someone else, now you're on an equal playing field. Now, if this person has a higher degree than you, well, that person's going to be above you, and different things like that. And so I think that's, you know, why, you know, for the Japanese, I know having the education piece, I know has really helped us, I think, as a society or as a, you know, culture to be, to have a successful businesses, successful lives, you know, in the United States.
Okay, so education, we need more athletics and more food, right? That's kind of what I'm hearing. But yeah, so seriously, it probably stems from education, but maybe you have some other ideas. What practical ideas do you have to improve the racial tensions in our country right
Oh, wow. I don't know if I have the answers for that. I mean, that is a huge, huge problem, I think, with everything that's going on. But I look at, like today, not today, but like just, the big issues right now is that people read or see one thing, it tends to be, or maybe two things only, and then they think that's the whole truth. And that's just not being educated, in my opinion. And I understand that some of these things that people watch or read have a very emotional value to it, and I understand the human piece there. But at the same time, that whole the education piece. Like here's an example, and I know people might say this might be like not liking what I'm going to say here in a second, but if you read the Black Lives Matters, okay. Now that statement, I'm all for. I love that statement. Okay. But the organization, it's important you read the documents because it says things in there that I know some people in America might not agree with, even though they're behind that statement. And I think, and that's just being educated, reading their mission statement, reading their values, what they're about. Because I think that's an important piece. And I think, a lot of people are just, again, it's the social media and trying to be a part of a group and feeling, connected by saying, oh, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But I would bet that there's a lot of people that don't agree with their mission statement. Again, kind of like me, agree with the statement, the three words, Black Lives Matter, but don't agree, so I think that's, and that's the one thing I think, what, as an educator and as a coach, I think being able to educate our players that, hey, before you just jump on the bandwagon or jump on, and you should really read everything that goes on in these things. And that's being educated and learning those things and understanding, what it's about. Because, there's other movements or other organizations that, might be the exact same thing as a Black Lives, just has a different term, okay? But it might be more of your values and what you believe in. And then that's the organization you should be behind. Or, the other thing is all these, I know other things, I'm just talking to my players, and I know they just heard it because some celebrity said, hey, give money to this organization. So guys on my team just gave money to those organizations, which is great. I mean, they're trying to do something, like my players. But at the same time, I'm like, did you read what it's about? Did you read what the mission statement is? Did you read what they're trying to do? Because I said, it's important you get that information. And if you believe in it, great. If you don't, then you should know about that. And it's the same thing with all this stuff. So I think that's, and I think that in terms of education piece is that kids today, or people today with, I shouldn't say just kids, but kids, I mean, people with social media are so quick to judge, so quick to come to conclusions without knowing the whole truth. And I understand pictures say 1,000 words, and I get that. And they see the pictures of all these awful things that happen, and they will, jump. At the same time, being educated on, these pictures that we've seen, that's not, that doesn't show the whole picture. It shows one glimpse of, for 10 minutes, the George Floyd thing with that. And now all of a sudden every policeman is that in America, which is not true. Are there some like that? Sure. Obviously there was, but not everyone's like that. And that's where, education, learning, doing research, having that process of doing that. And like I said, that's such an important piece that I think as, do that. And people who are not educated just don't, when you go through education, you have to be logical about certain things and understand the process of learning those things. So doing that, you understand, how to research things, how to look at things, how to read things, how to understand things. And then you can make better decisions and educated decisions on, how you want to support and which way you should support. And and those things. And then, and then the other thing I think, you know, people, in terms of all these social media things, these are, I saw something the other day, which I thought was really good. They said, hey, these things on social media are opinions. They're not the facts. They're someone's opinion. And everyone's, you know, and today everyone feels like their opinion is the one that matters, which is great. People are passionate, but then I also see a lot of just hate and those things based on just someone having a different opinion. You know, so I think that's, again, that's a lack of education too, is that, hey, it's okay to hear different opinions and listen to those different opinions, listen to those different values, and see, maybe I thought of things differently, and to learn. And again, learning how to do things with an educational mind and understanding that, I think it's a big piece. So that's where, you know, I would think is the education is where, you know, a lot of these people are just, like I said, are just so quick to judge and go off of opinions off of social media. And I think, you know, social media has really put a lot of, you know, fuel that cause bigger flames through a lot of this stuff. You know, it's great for getting news out and those things like that too, but at the same time, it can have that effect too, where it causes more explosions than necessary sometimes too. So it's important that people read those things, understand what they're reading and how to read it, and understand that they're opinions a lot of times, not facts. And also when you're trying to go beyond an organization, you know, read what those organizations are about. And yeah.
So to be logical, to be educated, it takes work, right? You can't just base things on emotion. And so often, you know, we see that inflammatory picture or video or whatever, and we just want to respond. You know, we just had, this is a controversial one too. Nick Sandmann was a young man who was wearing a Trump hat and was accused of, you know, accosting a Native American guy. And I'll tell you, when I first saw that, I was furious at that guy. And you know, I saw the comments on social media, but one thing I've come up with is like a 2-day rule or 48-hour rule. Like, let things play out for a couple of days, see what the other evidence is, and that you're not just seeing a little portion of a clip, right? So get your sources of information from multiple sources, hear different sides, and then have an informed and logical approach. That's a great answer. What would you say gives you the greatest hope for our country as we move forward?
Well, the greatest hope, I mean, I don't know. I think you can only control what, you know, one of my statements I always have in my football program is control the controllables. You can only control what you do. You can't control what anyone else does. And so in terms of, you know, in terms of what the greatest hope is what I can do. And what I can do as a coach, my platform, as a teacher, as my platform, is to try to help my students or my players understand what I just talked about. Read things, learn things, you know, understand what's going on. Just don't go by the pictures. You know, just don't go by the one statement. Go by the whole document. You know, read it through, and you know, and I think that's where I would try to help kids understand things. Just, you got to see the whole picture. And like, I'm a math teacher, so like, here's a great way of showing like the whole picture. What I'm talking about is, you know, you hear like the Crest commercial, and I always bring this up in math class, like 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Crest, right? Well, all they need is 4 dentists to say, yes, we recommend Crest. They could have asked 1 million dentists. So they don't say 4 out of 1 million, they say 4 out of 5, because it just sounds better, and they're not lying, but they're not telling you the whole truth. And that's where you got to read the whole truth and know, because if you hear 4 out of 5, like, oh, that's really good, I'm going to get Crest, you know, toothpaste. But again, you gotta see the whole picture. And you know, it's the same thing like you see like the bar graphs and stuff. And if you only see the very top of the bar graph, you know, now it looks like a huge gap. But if you look at the whole bar graph, it's just a little bit they're ahead, you know, and those things. So it's just different ways to manipulate data. And again, everyone, if they're going to try to have you buy into their product or buy into the philosophy or buy into the things, they are going to try to manipulate things to make you believe those things. So that's why it's important you read or look at the whole thing. So that's one that I always try to tell students and try to tell my players is that, hey, I love that you're going to be passionate about something, and if you have opinions and you want to do things, that's great. Just be informed. Make sure you're educated about it, and read the whole document. So that's, as a platform, as a coach and a teacher, I think I have a great opportunity and a responsibility to do those things for the next generation of kids, and help them out and understand those things, because I think in today's world it's so easy to react upon social media and not think through things. So.
Great. I'll let you have the last word. If there's something that we didn't touch on or one other thing you wanted to share, I'll let you share that, and then we'll close out.
Let's see. No, honestly, just thank you for having this opportunity, and thank you for, it's been great getting to know you too throughout this whole character challenge and now and all this stuff. So I appreciate you doing all this, taking the time, because to do one a day and for an hour, that's a lot of time to put into this thing. So I want to say thank you for that and for this opportunity. I just think through I think through sports, I'm sure a lot of coaches are going to be watching this through sports. I think it's, as coaches, I think, we all have such a huge influence really to make a difference. And I really hope, all coaches use that platform to help kids understand, what is going on in this world, how to be educated about it, how to, how to empower them, that they have, they can make a difference, and teach them how to do it the right way and do it the correct way. So I think, that's what I would say. And thank you for, again, Dan, giving me this opportunity to talk about this stuff.
My pleasure. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.